is Australian Agenda with Peter Van Onselen.
Hello and welcome to Australian Agenda. Thanks very much for your company. Well, the big news domestically during the course of the week has been the will he or won't he support an iron ore price inquiry. I'm talking about the Prime Minister. He gave very strong indications, at the least you could say, that he would, but there was a backflip in that respect. The man that started this off was Nick Xenophon, Senator Nick Xenophon. We'll be talking to him in a moment out of Adelaide. But also internationally, one of the big issues of the week, decided just last night, in fact, was in Ireland. There was a referendum on gay marriage. They needed a referendum because it was in the Constitution that marriage could only be between a man and a woman. Well, they've had it. It looks like comfortably over 60% of the population have voted in favour of changing their Marriage Act. So that's an interesting one to watch in the context of what will happen in this country as debate continues about whether or not there should be a conscience vote in the Parliament on the issue of gay marriage. A lot to talk about in the context of the budget as well. My colleague Paul Kelly is away for this fortnight. I'm joined here by my colleague from the Australian, Troy Bramston, and we've got a special edition for you on Australian Agenda today. Not one, not two, we have four crossbenchers within the Senate joining us, three of whom are here live in the studio, including Senator Jackie Lambie. Welcome to the program. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Senator Scott Ludlam from the Greens. Appreciate your time as well. And Senator David Leyonhjelm. Appreciate your company. And as I say, we're also joined by Nick Xenophon live out of Adelaide. We'll be coming to him in a moment as well. Let me kick things off if I can. Scott Ludlam, the Greens have been arguing for gay marriage for a long time. Do you think that what's happened in Ireland overnight is likely to make it more likely that we'll see action sooner rather than later in Australia?
I really hope so, because it's not one of those things that you would normally say we'd seen sooner rather than later. I've been in the Senate now for nearly 7 years, and we've had a bill for marriage equality in Australia come on several times, and it keeps falling short. There were reports last week that we might only be 4 votes short in the House of Representatives, and that we might be able to carry a majority in the Senate. So I hope what's happened overseas will move things along. It's really about time.
David Leyonhjelm, I mean, you're the person that's been putting forward this private members bill on the issue of gay marriage. Can I ask you, before getting to what's happened in Ireland, about what has happened within the Labor Party? Tanya Plibersek and Bill Shorten are at odds over whether there should be a binding vote. I'm assuming as a Libertarian, whilst you're in favour of support for gay marriage in a conscience vote structure, you wouldn't want any party to bind on this.
No, it should be a conscience vote for everybody, in my view. It's not a matter for forcing people to vote against their will. I didn't like it when Tanya Plibersek called for a binding vote, because it made the Conservatives in the Liberal Party say, well, if that's what Labor's going to do, then we don't have to go down that path. We can have a binding vote against it. So I wasn't very impressed by that. But I think what's happened in Ireland is going to be good for potential of my bill to get through and get a positive vote. There are quite a lot of Liberals who would never vote for a Greens same-sex marriage bill or a Labor same-sex marriage bill, but they'll vote for a Libertarian same-sex marriage bill.
But if the bills are no different, is that just because of posturing?
I'm presenting it as a different argument. The traditional argument is equality, and that doesn't resonate with them. My argument is it's not the government's business what gender person you're allowed to marry. In the old days, governments used to say a black person couldn't marry a white person, or a Catholic couldn't marry a Protestant, and a Jew couldn't marry a Gentile. Still, the government says a man can't marry a man, or a woman can't marry a woman. So all we're really doing is saying get the government out of it.
Jackie Lambie, what's your view on this issue?
Oh, look, I believe in giving the power back to the people on this, whether it's on this or the elderly age euthanasia. It's about time that the people were giving the vote on that. It shouldn't just come down to our conscience, it should come down to every Australian's conscience and how they want to vote. So definitely a referendum for this one. Personally, to me, it's a sacred Christian religious tradition to me, and I'm pretty solid on saying when it comes to marriage, marriage stays between a man and woman. But once again, the power needs to go back to the people. We have an elderly population in here in Australia, and I'll tell you what, my money would be on, I don't think you're going to get the same result that was just happened over in Ireland overnight. As a matter of fact, I don't think you'll get the numbers. But that's just my personal view. However, like I said, give the power back to the people, let them have their vote. Let's do a referendum. Let's do the referendum. Let's see what the answers are.
Senator Xenophon, can I just ask you on this issue? I want to talk to you obviously about the iron ore price debate, which you've been in the thick of during the course of the week. But on the issue of gay marriage, in the wake of what's happened in Ireland, Jackie Lambie has just said that she'd like to see it as a referendum so that the people can truly decide. There's not really a talk about that yet, but you never know. There might be some move in that direction post what's happened in Ireland. What's your view?
Oh, look, firstly, I supported marriage equality when it came up before the Senate. I'll continue to do so. I got in trouble, though, when I glibly said that I believe that gays have every right to be as miserable as heterosexuals. But seriously, it's an important issue of equality. David Leyonhjelm's right. This is an issue, and he's reminded us of the absurdities of marriage laws in the past. Whether we have a referendum or not, if that's a circuit breaker, that's fine. I think that the best approach is that there be a conscience vote in the Parliament, so every politician has a conscience vote on this issue. After all, it has been an election issue, so I'm not against the concept of a referendum, but let's see whether the Parliament can vote on this and make a decision and bite the bullet on it.
You know, I think that the problem is that just because we have a conscience vote, Nick, doesn't mean that's what the rest of Australia wants. We need to know how Australia wants to vote. This should be taken out of the hands of us. This is a really important matter. It needs to be given back. The power needs to be given back to the people of Australia.
I was going to move on to the budget. I might start with you, Senator Lambie. There's a number of measures that are unclear in terms of their passage through the Senate. The first one I wanted to ask about is the pension changes. The government, of course, has announced a new scheme to tighten eligibility for the pension, a new assets test. This is supposed to save the budget about $2.4 billion over 4 years. Where do you stand on this one?
Well, at the moment, I haven't been able to speak to the Social Services Minister. I haven't been able to speak to Morrison. I'm booked in to see him Monday. I have had quite a bit of community consultation back on that. So I just want to see exactly where he's going. The tapering, I think, is probably a good idea, but I just want to make sure that I see it all in black and white. Yes, I'm still sitting in the middle on that.
Have you been trying to see him, or is this just more a case of it's sort of in the diary at that point in time?
You know, when he was the Immigration Minister, I had no issues in seeing him. I don't know whether he's just sort of ran out of time, but I would have hoped that he would have spoken to me a little bit earlier, but, you know, I'm not sure what the circumstances are, and I'll give him the benefit of the doubt, and I'll be looking forward to seeing him on Monday.
Scott Ludlam, has there been any change in the relationship between the Greens and the government? I mean, there was some suggestions coming from Liberals in the wake of the leadership change that this might be a new era of consultation between the two parties that have traditionally been anything other than seen eye to eye.
Well, we still don't see eye to eye with a lot of the things that they're up to, and I think maybe they're misreading where we've been all along. We've always been, I mean, we get sent here from around the country to negotiate on stuff. That's what Parliament's for. So, you know, particularly given that they've backed down on some of the more aggressive measures in last year's budget, I think there is certainly room to move on, you know, on some of the measures that we can discuss here, but it's not as though we weren't up for negotiation before. So
would that include the proposed changes to the pension in terms of tightening that eligibility around the assets test?
Possibly. We're reserving our position on it. I think Rachel Seward, who's very close to these issues and has been working on this for a long time, I think we're cautiously supportive of some of the measures. We've been arguing for a broader retirement incomes review because at the moment the elephant in the room being superannuation and its tax treatment. You know, this kind of narrow tweaks and fine-tuning of the pension might be all very well, and we've just got 2 weeks of budget estimates to test the detail, but it's in the context of some older Australians retiring into abject poverty and some being very comfortable, and that's not something that any of us should be happy with. One
of the issues in relation to the budget, of course, is we've got a situation where the major parties are often not seen eye to eye on most issues, so therefore it will be the crossbench that make the decision whether or not things get through the Senate. If the opposition doesn't see eye to eye with the government, it does come down to the crossbenches. I'd like to just do a quick run around, maybe starting with you, Nick Xenophon, as the person that's not here. What is your view in broad terms on the budget? What do you like about it? What do you dislike?
In 30 seconds or less,
You can take a bit longer than that if you like.
All right, I'll do it in 45 seconds. I think the small business package hopefully will work. I know some economists say it may not give the kick along that's needed, but I think it will have an effect of stimulating jobs growth in the small business sector. I certainly hope it does. I think that the tapering rate of the pension is something that we're just simply going back to what Paul Keating and John Howard were doing. We're having a tapering rate that is much more sustainable, much better than getting rid of average weekly earnings indexation of the pension rather than CPI, which is much less generous. In terms of the issue of family tax benefit B, the big reservation I have there is that if you cut the benefits once a child turns 6, you will cause all sorts of problems instead of the current threshold of 16.
But can I ask you on that one, Nick Xenophon, I've got to jump in, that the government have obviously tied that change to family tax benefit to their package that Scott Morrison wants to get through. So does that mean that even though you might like that package, you can't tolerate the way that they're looking to fund it?
Now that means we're back under the ransom and blackmail situation. It's great.
Tried that last
year.
year.
Tried it last year.
Look, I don't think that's a good way. That's not a good way to negotiate. I think the childcare package has a lot of merit to it. I agree with David Lionhelm. I don't want to be shocking David by agreeing too much with him this morning. But
It's a Sunday. It's a Sunday.
It's a Sunday. But there are some factors that the states have a role to in terms of unnecessary regulation. Of course, we want the highest quality framework for childcare, but some of the red tape that's been imposed in the last few years has put up costs unnecessarily, and that's something that needs to be looked at as well.
David Lionhelm?
I think the pension tapering will get through, probably with Labor support. Labor Party claims to be very, very strong on means testing, and the idea of arguing in favour of people with $1.5 million in assets being eligible for the pension would be a pretty hard case for them to make. So I think they'll probably support it so it won't come down to the crossbench. I don't think it's very good policy anyway. All it'll mean is an awful lot of people rearrange their affairs so they remain eligible. Like if they put a few $100,000 into their house or go on a big trip to Europe or something like that, they can spend the money and then remain eligible for the pension. So it's not good policy. The other issues are going to be interesting. There is a bit of a denial still, in fact more than a bit, amongst Labor, Scott's party, and I think most of my crossbench colleagues, that the budget balance needs to be sorted, that our fiscal responsibility needs to be addressed. There just seems to be this denial, if you like, that we can spend more money than we bring in. I seem to be a fairly lonely voice saying that. Well, Nick, yeah, I'm not. I didn't include you, I didn't mention you by name, but you do vote with the Greens an awful lot, so I can make various assumptions.
How are you going with the Libs voting on yours? What's your scorecard with that, David?
Say again?
What's your scorecard with voting along the way of the line of the Libs, of the Liberal Party?
Yeah, my voting record was in the paper the other day, over 70%. Yours is 50, I think. Scott's 2.
2%.
Nick's 30% with the government. Yeah, probably more.
To be fair, a lot of those figures relate to the national security legislation where David and I did vote. So that skews it a bit on the carbon tax, on the TPVs, the asylum seeker policies. I thought, on balance, the government had better policies.
Jackie Lambie, when you mentioned before, when I was talking about the government sort of, if you like, tailoring their new social security package to family tax benefit changes, you mentioned that that's them holding us to ransom again. What do you mean by that? Well,
what they're doing is they're giving with one hand and taking from the other, and you just can't with your Part B for a child that's once they turn 6, you no longer get that. That's absolute rubbish. We all know children get older; they cost more each year as they're getting older. So saying that you can only have this for all the childcare, but we've got to take this away from here, and I just don't. That's not very good. That's not fair. That's playing it off each other, and by hitting those areas off against each other is not going to move this nation forward.
But is your view that you can expand the amount spent in that area overall? Because of course the response to that, I suspect David Lionhelm would take this view as well, is that there's only so much money that can be spent, so therefore, whether we like it or not, you've got to find the savings at the same time that you find the spending.
Well, there's plenty of savings. There's plenty of savings in the budget. First of all, we can go back to the foreign aid budget. We can take more off that, and I know you're spewing about that.
They've pretty much done the foreign aid budget over as hard as they can.
We have the, the sale of the assets to states, which is bribe to the states. There's $5 billion there. Infrastructure, we're not out there. We're not giving these youth jobs. Tony Abbott was meant to be the PM known as the infrastructure king or infrastructure PM, and I just don't think he's doing that very wisely. So get out there, get that infrastructure moving and stop leaving it to the last 6 or 12 months before your next election to make yourself look good. That infrastructure, that $50 billion should have started nearly 2 years ago, and he should have been out there and he should have been throwing it out there.
Senator Ludlam, can I ask you about the Greens' position generally about the budget? Both Labor and the Coalition have what they think is a plan to return the budget to surplus. I don't think it's credible on either side, something that Peter and I agree on and have written about. But what is the Greens' view? I mean, should the budget come back to surplus over the forward estimates or another period? What is the view?
I think it would be very difficult to pull it back into surplus over the forward estimates because the revenue and growth projections, I think, in the budget are wildly unrealistic. And the government's copped a fair bit of criticism for these heroic assumptions about how rapidly they're going to be able to turn the budget around. I think it does need to be brought back into surplus, but not as some kind of article of religious faith. We've put a lot of revenue proposals and savings proposals on the table to the government over the last couple of years. A few things that have sort of been mentioned earlier, David talking before about people just sort of shunting wealth into property to keep it from the tax man. We've got to have a hard look at that. Labor have indicated they're cautiously supportive of looking at things like negative gearing, capital gains tax exemption. Hockey ruled it out without even giving it a moment's thought. Tax concessions of superannuation, paying the diesel bill of the mining industry, extraordinary subsidies to fossil fuel industries to assist them to cook the place. There's money there. We could have a disagreement about where we could get it from, but it's not like there are no other revenue sources available to us.
My complaint with those proposals is they involve an increase in taxes, not a reduction in spending. We do have a spending problem, not a revenue problem. And increasing our tax burden just makes Australia less competitive with the rest of the world. We are competing with the likes of Singapore, which has half our tax rate. We just can't go squeezing the lemon any further. Already, the top 1% of income earners earn 10% of the income in wages terms, pay 18% of the tax bill.
And there are millionaires who pay no tax at all. There are multinational corporations vacuuming enormous profits out of this country and paying bugger all tax.
Well, let me ask you something. The good example is Apple. Apple designs an iPhone in America, sends it to, or gets it made in China, and then exports it to Australia and sells it to consumers here. How much can we legitimately claim of that is attributable to Australians? How much tax should we impose on Apple for all we're doing basically is acting like a shop here? There's a very poor argument for saying companies like Apple should pay more tax. They're obeying the law, they have costs, they're deducting their costs from their profits like any business does. You've really got to ask yourself, what does Australia do to deserve substantially more taxes from the likes of Apple?
Nick Xenophon, do you agree with that?
No, I don't. I was part of the aggressive corporate tax minimisation inquiry of the Economics Committee, yet to hand down its report. I think the ATO Commissioner, Chris Jordan, the Tax Commissioner, made it very clear that some of these companies are being investigated by the Tax Office for their practices. There's now going to be a broader anti-avoidance provision in the budget, which I think is very welcome. Scott Ludlam alluded to it. BHP, for instance, had a so-called marketing hub in Singapore. $5.7 billion went through it. $150,000 in tax was paid over a number of years. That doesn't seem quite right to me. I take David's point, but I think there's also an issue of an aggressive tax minimisation using offshore hubs, and Apple has been funneling their profits, $10 billion in the last decade, to Ireland. That doesn't seem a very transparent way of doing it, and it actually hurts Australian businesses who don't have those sorts of arrangements.
All right, hold that thought. We're going to take a break here on Australian Agenda. We're talking to 4 of the Senate crossbenchers. When you talk to the government, sometimes they tell you privately that trying to get them to agree on anything is like herding cats. I'll get their reaction to that when we come back.
Australia, at Coles, everyone can afford to feed their family like a chef. In-season veggies.
Coles Curtis.
Yum. You know nothing tastes better than the finest quality ingredients, and so does Coles. Beautiful. Oh. And with a little help from my recipes, you'll be feeding your family like a chef every day.
Yum.
All my tips and recipes on taste.com.au. So to feed your family like a chef every day, shop where a chef shops.
Coles!
There are no nasty surprises with Telstra's mobile real-time data alerts. And now you can turn on extra data to automatically top up with blocks of 1 gig for just $10 to see you through the month. Just set and forget. Yeah. Turn on extra data today.
Nice. Nurse? Sexy nurse? What's Maddie going as? Cat!
Trevor! Trevor's in the trees!
I got this.
Accidents can be chaotic. Luckily, you can capture exactly what happened with our Amy Access app.
You can come down now, Neil. I don't think I can.
You're with Amy.
To be a trader, you need that spark inside. The courage, vision, and determination. The eye to see opportunity, and the wit to seize the right one. IG.
There are rules about what you see on TV. The industry association ASTRA has developed codes of practice covering programming on subscription television channels like this one. To see the codes, visit the ASTRA website at astra.org.au.
The time for reconciliation has never been better.
When we value our differences,
as well as the things that we have in common, we can build great relationships.
So during National Reconciliation Week,
let's reflect on the relationships between Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples
and other Australians.
How will you make a difference?
Go here and get involved.
Christian Porter could have been on track to be a West Australian Premier. Instead, he's on Tony Abbott's team. We'll talk to him about looming clashes between the states and Canberra. Also, are we already losing the war against Islamic State? Viewpoint on Sky News Live.
Welcome back. You're watching Australian Agenda, where Troy Bramston and I are talking to Jackie Lambie, Scott Ludlam, David Lionhelm, and joining us out of Adelaide, Senator Nick Xenophon. Senator Xenophon, I know that you were concerned about coming on the program because you were wanting to watch Eurovision. In some breaking news, Sweden have won. I hope I haven't ruined your preset record for that when you get home. I know you do have to go.
Did ABBA? So ABBA won again.
Yeah, well, there you go. Maybe the new ABBA. But all right, let me talk to you about the issue of the week in domestic politics, which is your idea, I suppose you could call it, for a Senate inquiry into iron ore and the price setting of iron ore. Twiggy Forrest had been campaigning pretty hard on this. There were suggestions that the government were looking to perhaps support this because they see you as the new kingmaker in the Senate, somebody that can perhaps bring the crossbench together. How do you feel the way it actually all ended up?
I think my crossbench colleagues can attest this. Every time someone says rubbish like kingmaker, it means the opposite. I think it upsets.
You lose power every time it gets mentioned, do you?
well, whatever power I had, there's a lot less every time someone uses that word rubbish like that. Look,
that's why you're shrinking.
That's
why you're shrinking, Nick. It's all that weight on your shoulders.
That's right. No, it's more like the bad trapezius muscle. Look, the situation is this. Andrew Forrest has put up a case that he thinks has been predatory volume discounting or dumping a volume of iron ore, which is pushing down the iron ore price. There have been some interesting comments made by the likes of Rio Sam Walsh saying, well, if some of our, quote, friendly competitors are affected or go out of business as a result of more volume in the market, well, that's just the market at play. I thought there were two aspects to an inquiry. First, how do we recalibrate? How do we face the challenges of an $18 billion hole in the budget with a fall in the iron ore price? In other words, what do we do about it? Because I don't think we handled the last mining boom very well.
But did the government tell you that they would support it in private before changing their position publicly?
No, we don't have to look at private discussions. You can see what the Prime Minister and the Treasurer said in a number of media announcements, including on Alan Jones's show a couple of Fridays ago. I thought they were going to go ahead with it. They had shown me some terms of reference that were not too dissimilar to mine, which were going to be, it was intended to be a joint select committee of both Houses of Parliament, chaired by a government MP, in all likelihood Angus Taylor, someone who's previously worked as a consultant in the mining sector, someone I would have been quite happy to have as a chair of the inquiry. But I think there were all these sovereign risk arguments put up, and
did they talk to you? Did they let you know why they've changed their mind?
Look, I think it was fairly clear. I mean, the Treasurer was good enough to give me a call on late Thursday afternoon, moments before the announcement was made that they wouldn't be supporting an inquiry. I understand that there was the idea of the Productivity Commission taking it away from the Parliament, looking at this issue, but that was pushed by the wayside. I mean, look, they're very good lobbyists, the mining sector. BHP, Rio, Gina Reinhardt, they did take my hat off to them, my hard hat off to them. They did a great job of killing this inquiry, but the issues won't go away in terms of the allegations made by Andrew Forrest. And secondly, what do we do in the post-mining boom to make our economy more competitive, to cope with the rivers of iron ore revenue that just aren't there? Senator
Xenophon, of course it's not a bad idea to have an inquiry in principle into anything, because you can obviously examine what's going on. But the problem is, isn't it, that any inquiry is going to end up recommending some kind of government action, which could then have a negative effect on what is an open market, and a negative effect on investment, jobs and industry growth. I mean, because an inquiry obviously has got to recommend something at the end of the day, and there's very little things you could do other than to ask government to intervene in what is a private sector market.
Not necessarily. It could be, Troy, it could be a case of looking at having an effects test, because at the moment we don't have an effects test. This could strengthen the case that Ian Harper put up in his review for an effects test in terms of abuse or misuse of market power. I'm not saying there has been in this case, but this is slightly different from other cases. These resources are owned by the people of Australia, or the people of Western Australia in the West, where they are mined by virtue of a licence that the Western Australian Parliament gives, with an obligation to get the best possible price for those resources. All I'm saying is that an inquiry with recommendations, whatever they may have been, is not the same as government policy, but it apparently spooked not just the government but the opposition as well.
All right, Nick Xenophon, I know that you're keen to get back to Eurovision. You do have a pre-existing arrangement that you wanted to get away for. More seriously.
I've got a flight to catch.
All right, thanks for your time. We appreciate you joining us on the program. Thanks for that.
Thank you.
All right, let's continue with the discussion around the iron ore inquiry idea. David Leyonhjelm, what's your view on this? I mean, I suppose philosophically you'd be concerned about where it might go, but by the same token, I can't imagine that you'd want to get in the road of a Senate inquiry.
No, generally I support motions to establish inquiries. I think Parliament's role, well, Senate's role, is to look at things. It's a House of Review, and normally I would be in favour of that. I take Troy's point, though, that having an inquiry like this creates expectations that the government will do something. And philosophically, my view is the government shouldn't do anything. And you also have to be careful that Parliament is not being used as a sort of a tool to pursue one business interest. So Andrew Forrest's made some business calls. Perhaps he regrets them now. And in a way, he's saying, well, I'd like, big government to come along and help me out here. We've got to be very wary of that sort of thing.
Scott Lovell?
I think it's in dangerous territory where the iron ore majors, argue that Parliament shouldn't look into an area of public policy as important as this. This has shattered the West Australian budget. The state's finances have absolutely gone off a cliff. The Barnett government is pretending they didn't see it coming, as though it was just going to carry on indefinitely. And it's demonstrated to us, and one of the reasons I think that we would have supported an inquiry if it had come through, it's demonstrated to us just how perilously narrow our economic base is in Western Australia, and by extension the rest of the country, that we rely on one single low-value bulk commodity where prices are set overseas. I think the inquiry could quite usefully have dug into, potentially the degree to which the majors here have no control over the price. You look at the tie-up between China and Brazil over even the last week to get a sense of how helpless we are in the face of these commodity movements. I would have, I guess, used an inquiry like that as a way of examining whether we should have a more diversified economy that's not so heavily reliant on bulk export of these commodities.
Do you think there should be government intervention in the iron ore sector?
No, not necessarily. And I think that kind of freaking out on behalf of Rio and BHP, the idea that it introduces sovereign risk if the Senate conducts an inquiry into one of the most important exports in the country is childish. It's absolutely childish.
On that I agree with Scott. It was a gross overreaction to say there's a sovereign risk aspect there. There isn't a sovereign risk aspect. It's a legitimate area for inquiry. My point simply was that it raises expectations.
Jackie Lembie?
Oh, well, the first thing is when it comes to sending inquiries and recommendations, I'd like you to go back through time and actually be able to level up how many of those recommendations are still collecting dust. It really annoys me. So I think it's about time we got bang, we got bang for our buck here when it comes to Senate inquiries, and not just doing an inquiry on that part of the iron ore, but also asking how and why we're not doing more value adding of our iron ore here in the country. And the other thing is, can we create a sovereign wealth fund with a part of the royalties received from the iron ore? So it's not just looking at one thing. I think we need to look at 3 or 4 different
sovereign
scenarios.
wealth fund. It's called the Future Fund.
Yeah, but I just believe that and that's going to run out. They're going to run short. We know this from the pensions. That's not going to keep going and going. No, but if you look at it in 10 or 15 years' time, we start paying all these pensions back. That may not be the case. So I'm just wondering whether we should be using some of these iron ore funds to whether that's top that up or have its own.
Instead of infrastructure or hospitals or schools or paying pensions or paying for welfare, you're saying instead of all those things that should go into a sovereign wealth fund.
No. What I'm saying...
There's not enough money to do everything.
No. What's the problem? So we're going to have to make sure there is enough money to be able to do this in the future.
Increase taxes,
and this is the problem.
So you want to increase taxes?
No, what I'm asking is for those terms of reference to be extended right out with this inquiry, and that the government is that Tony Abbott not backflip like he's already done and hold his ground, stand his ground. Let's have the inquiry. I want to know, the Australian people want to know, and we want more information about what's going on out there. That's what I'm asking. It's all about transparency. That's the Australian way, and that's what I want to see.
It's a pretty amazing example of the power of the iron ore majors, though, to be able to just make that call to the PM and hockey and flip their position 180 degrees. It's remarkable.
You can say the same thing, though, about the original positioning versus what Twiggy Forrest had to say. Perhaps his direct access to decision makers, and then we've seen the return of serve from the big majors as well.
I guess what
He's a very good lobbyist.
Well, it's not just that. Is it coming down to political funding? That's what I want to know. Are these decisions coming back to the political funding? So let's have a look. Let's open these terms of reference. Let's get the answers.
OK, can I move on to a different topic? Senator Lambie, I wanted to ask you about your new political party, the Jackie Lambie Network, up and running this week. I want to ask the three of you about your own political parties and where they're headed. Can you give us an indication about the strategy you're going to run for your political party? Will you run Senate candidates in all the Australian states and territories? Will you run lower house candidates, or are you simply focused on Tasmania? And does that include possibly running candidates at the next election?
I'll be running two senators in each state. That's the first thing I'll be doing, and I'm out there, and I'm sure the veteran community that's already going through the back door. I'm looking from veterans from Afghanistan and Iraq to give them a second chance at life and bring them into Parliament. That's what I'm looking for. So I'm looking for a full house on that.
So just on that, so are you trying to recruit former veterans to run as your candidates?
Absolutely, I am. Yep, if they're prepared to go out there and give their life for their country, I believe that what they could give back to the country in politics, it will be phenomenal.
And are you planning to run in lower houses as well, at least in Tasmania perhaps?
Not this time around, no. So we'll see how we go this time around. But there's only a small amount of us that are doing the network, so we just want to keep it nice and tight and see if we can get some veterans through and give them a second chance.
The most important thing in politics, unfortunately, is money. Well, in terms of being able to run candidates, establish a political party, and so on, you need money to do this. Advertising and so on, and paying fees and so on. Where does your money come from? Do you have an active fundraising network?
What we'll do is we'll do like a crowdfunding thing, and we'll be asking the public. I really would like to see the public putting in here, because like you've seen in the past when it comes to politics, that political funding can actually decide which way you're going to vote, and I don't want to be put in that position. So it's me to get out there and sell that and ask the public to fund me as much as what they possibly can, and we're just going to have to see how that goes. This is a new way of doing things. I'm going to trial it. We're going to see how we go and see how the outcome of that.
All important to your chances or your party's chances of success at the next election and beyond is what the Senate voting system is. Now, the major parties have come together, indeed with the Greens, to look at recommendations to change that. Tony Abbott has apparently said that you'll know when an election's about to be called because it'll be just before then that we'll have this legislation going into the Parliament in relation to Senate reform. David Leyonhjelm, what's your reaction to that?
The Labor Party is telling me that they won't support it, so it will only occur if there's...
Who's telling you that? Because
factions.
Publicly, they've obviously backed this.
I have my sources. The Labor Party is telling me they won't support the proposed Senate voting reform because it would lock them into a coalition or an alliance with the Greens, and they're very uncomfortable about that. And so there would have to be a deal between the government and the Greens. Politically, that would be awkward for them, both for the Greens and for the government. So I'm not sure if that's going to proceed. But yes, I mean, the rumours are pretty strong to that effect. The thing is, of course, that the government's also got the issue of whether they will win an election to think about, not just whether they can change the Senate voting. And they would have to call a double dissolution in order to get rid of us ferals all in one go. And even that, and that's a big call too. So I don't see it happening myself, but it
Do you agree with that, Scott Ludlam? I mean, the Greens have supported the two majors on this in terms of the inquiry.
No, we were there first. The proposal to take our Senate voting system out of the hands of expert preference engineers and put it back into the hands of the voters is something we've been advocating for years. Very supportive and protective of the role of minor parties and independents, because that's where we came from. But we're seeing the process being gamed really expertly by backroom operators, which has very little to do with the person in the polling booth. So irrespective of where the proposals come from, and I tend to agree it's starting to feel a bit less likely, but we'll see where it goes.
Why do you say that it's starting to feel less likely?
I don't think the Prime Minister's got the courage, quite frankly, to call a double dissolution election. It actually, as much as you might be trying to wash the Senate out of independents and people who disagree with him, it halves the voting quota. It actually makes it easier for Greens and independents and people of diverse views to get elected. So, let him try his luck.
Jackie Lambie?
Well, I think that if we were to take a vote on those reforms, that the crossbench is going to lose out, because I believe the Greens, Libs and Labor, they're going to join forces, and this is what they want to do. They want to try and knock crossbenchers out. There's no doubt about that. We're really feeling the impact of that. I don't think that's a fair democracy, and we'll fight like hell to make sure the current system changes unless they can come up with something. But the only thing I will say, though...
We will fight like hell.
Yeah, we will.
But how is it's democratic to have backroom operators with very, good brains and good spreadsheets engineering preference flows that have absolutely nothing to do with people's voting intention? You were elected in Tassie without the help of those people. You got a good, solid vote. How is it pro-democratic to let that kind of gaming of the system carry on?
Look, I think, and that's why we need to send an inquiry. First of all, is a very small percentage of that vote, does that mean you can pass your preferences on? Should you have to reach 2 or 3% before you can have that? Does that mean these guys, you've got sometimes 200 parties on that Senate ticket. Does that mean that if you want to do that, you can't just get on the internet and get signatures? You've got to do it the old-fashioned way. You've got to get your boots on, get out there at the shopping centres and get a minimum of 1,000 signatures. Okay, doing that sort of thing, is there better ways of doing it?
I think for forming of parties, I'm a bit reluctant to say if you don't get a kind of minimum vote threshold, you shouldn't be elected. It's more about put the power back in the hands of the voter. The system is being gamed. It's being engineered.
We have that system, the recommended system in New South Wales, optional preferential above the line, and if it wasn't for the fact that 21 people have to be elected, the minor parties would be wiped out. When there's only 6 to be elected in a Senate election in each state, under the New South Wales system, no minor party would win. You guys would even struggle. It's just you don't end up with a a diverse representative.
David Linehelm, the other issue potentially, what do you think of if the government does support this with Labor and the Greens and the change comes through, is that necessarily in the government's interest? Because it would solidify the Greens as the balance of power party, and the Greens and the coalition don't exactly see eye to eye.
Yeah, that's an argument I've been putting to them, that they won't have a majority. They will at best have half. It'll be a log-jammed Senate, and they will be going to Scott all the time and saying, please, Scott, will you pass our legislation?
It'll only be log-jammed if they put up rubbish ideas. We'll deal with decent ideas.
On their merits, I know.
As we all do.
And for the first 9 months of this Parliament, after the election, we saw what happened. You didn't like any of the ideas, I don't think.
No, that's a reasonably fair summation. You didn't like some of them either.
No.
We've been on the same side of a reasonable number of votes.
But I'm talking about before Jackie and I came in the 9 months from September through to July.
They spent the first 9 months of their term in office trying to wreck the renewable energy industry that we've been doing our best to enable and encourage. So, yeah, we did have some disagreements there.
Right, hold that thought. We need to take another break here on Australian Agenda. But when we come back, we're going to talk about double dipping as well as various other measures in the budget. We'll get the panel's reaction. Back in a minute.
Australia, at Coles, everyone can afford to feed their family like a chef. In-season veggies?
Of course, Curtis.
Yum. You know nothing tastes better than the finest quality ingredients, and so does Coles. Beautiful. Oh. And with a little help from my recipes, you'll be feeding your family like a chef every day.
Yum.
All my tips and recipes on taste.com.au. So to feed your family like a chef every day, shop where a chef shops.
Coles!
At Hotels Combined, we compare the top travel sites.
For free.
That's right, and we guarantee to find you the best deal. Finding a great hotel deal is easy with Hotels Combined.
Too easy.
Check out Hotels Combined
Today.
Thinking of selling your real estate? Choosing the best agent could mean tens of thousands of dollars more in your pocket. Now you can compare real estate agents online for free with openagent.com.au. See all the agents in your area, look at their sales history, check out their customer reviews and get advice from our research team.
We got $75,000 more than the highest sale in the block.
We got more than $100,000 more than our reserve.
Choose the right real estate agent by calling 13 24 34 or go to openagent.com.au.
There are no nasty surprises with Telstra's mobile real-time data alerts. And now you can turn on extra data to automatically top up with blocks of 1 gig for just $10 to see you through the month. Just set and forget. Yeah. Turn on extra data today.
If you were me, what would you do next?
Start another business, build another website.
Hey, Heidi Highs, Heidi Lows, Heidi Weizen.
So 2014.
That's it.
With Wix, it's easy to create your own stunning website.
Heidi Whiteys.
You did this all by yourself?
Wanna try them on?
Go to Wix and create your site today.
I wanted to take you up to that lying.
About what?
Lying. You did it again this morning on your radio show.
Oh, yeah. You did that on the TV show.
I did
You lied
not.
to me.
I did not. I never had.
By omission.
Ha! I noticed you had to come at the bottom. But you said...
What did I say?
He was talking about it. You said...
What did I say?
I was listening. You said he was the least pretentious and most unassuming person you'd met in television. Well, that's obviously a lie. Obviously, it's clear.
Here he is.
Obviously a lie.
Press release. Stop press. Graham Richardson, former senator, former power broker within the Labor Party, is the least pretentious and most unassuming person I've ever known in television.
Sensational. I'm glad you've corrected the record. John Mitchell.
Absolutely. And Jones.
Yeah. Second.
Welcome back to the program where Troy Bramston and I are talking to three now members of the crossbench, Jackie Lambie, Scott Ludlam and David Linehelm.
Senator Ludlam, the Greens have just had a leadership change. This process has been very secretive, I think, compared to the other major parties. Can I ask you why the Greens always talk about transparency and accountability and openness, but we know very little about what goes on inside the Greens party room? Yeah. And attached to that question, can I ask why the Greens don't allow their members to elect a parliamentary leader, as the Labor Party now does, and the Greens do in the United Kingdom, as do the Tories and the Labor Party there?
Well, there's quite a bit there. I thought getting a lecture from Bill Shorten about direct membership election of the leader was pretty funny when his membership actually voted for the other guy. So we won't be taking our lessons on internal democracy from the ALP. We don't do that because our culture is actually very different to the Australian Democrats, but that was one of the things that tore them down. They had their Senate team and their membership organising and factionalising about their own internal leadership machinations, rather than looking after the country and the stuff that they'd got elected for.
Is that what the Greens would descend into, in your view, if you changed it?
In my view, and there are different views in the party. You would have seen Lee expressing a different view, and it's a good live conversation. My personal view is I don't want to have that kind of speculation and stuff that the media loves. And sorry, I don't know that we're secretive about it. Apologies for not drip-feeding you 6 months of leaks and backstabbing like the major parties
but
do.
it's not about that. It's about simply announcing what the ballot result was, which both major parties do.
Well, we didn't hold a ballot. We didn't need to hold a ballot.
But you have held ballots in the past, and they have not been disclosed at the time.
While there's only 11 of us, and I think in the past there would have been even fewer of us, it doesn't seem like a particularly important issue, to be quite honest. We had, I think, a good leadership transition, and it's enormous credit to Christine to get us where we are. We've got our largest ever representation in state and federal parliaments at the moment. Our membership is expanding as it's actually declining in the major parties, and I think we're in really good shape.
It's not declining in the Labor Party, but why is it okay for Greens members in the United Kingdom to elect their parliamentary leader but not in Australia?
Do you want me to just say again the stuff I just said?
Well, this is not a revolutionary idea. The British Tories do it, the Canadian Tories do it, the Labor Party in the UK, and so on. Why is there so much resistance to allowing members to have a vote for their leader?
Because I think it would be destabilising. As I said before, I don't want to necessarily have members of our party room campaigning amidst the membership for leadership positions. I think we've got much more interesting stuff to be talking about. And similarly, having your membership base, we've got 11 or 12,000 members nationally. We would much rather our membership is developing policy and out there campaigning about issues that really matter, rather than jostling for leadership positions. It's just not that useful.
All right, let's move the conversation on back to the budget. We don't need to talk about the leadership election processes in Jackie Lambie or David Leyonhjelm's parliamentary parties. Let's talk about double dipping. I want to get each of your views on this, because it is something where the government and the opposition are at odds in relation to paid parental leave. Jackie Lambie, what's your view? Is double dipping a problem, or is it the way that the scheme was designed and should therefore be retained?
First of all, when it comes to anything like double dipping or welfare, we taxpayers are prepared to put their money in to help those less fortunate. If you are not less fortunate, then why are we helping you? So I do have a problem with double dipping. I believe when it comes to the paid parental leave scheme, it needs to be capped. Okay, if your employer wants to pay you $12,000, then we need to work out a cap. None of these 150,000, 75 or 50. Let's have a look. Let's start the starter base at 25,000, because what I'd like to see is mothers out there being able to spend 6 months of their paid parental leave with their children that first 6 months. So we need to help them out. But what I don't want to be helping out is someone that's a parliamentarian that's married to a lawyer and is double dipping. That's not what that was ever introduced for. That was not the reasoning behind it. So let's get back to the basics.
You support the government on its endeavour to force people to choose between the minimum wage scheme or
No,
what their
I support the government in a top-up. So those people on minimum wage, minimum wage scheme, if they're only getting I think the average is about $9,000, and so they can have 6 months with their children instead of 3, is that we look at topping them up so they can have, the minimum wage is about $48,500, I believe. So if we can halve that at 25, so for the 6 months, and look at a cap scheme. That's what we're looking at. Okay, look, I've asked people like Kate Carnell, Jed Carney and them. I'll be speaking to all those big women this week. We're the women. We did, you know, we're the ones that have to go through the childbirth. We're the ones that have to bond with our children. So I want to hear what they have to say. I'll be putting my own proposal across the floor over the next few weeks, and I'll do the right thing, go and see Tony Abbott and present that to him first and see what he has to say about that, and try extending the olive branch out that way and see where we go and take it from there. But just say, this is what the ladies of Australia think. You know, that these are the bigger ladies. We've all been through a paid parental leave scheme, no problems with that. Mine was defence. Let's look at defence. You get 3 months full wages, or you can spread it out to 6. Now, for a normal digger, that ends up about $25,000 in terms of this year. So that's how I'd like to see it. That works very, very well for the women in Defence Force, and that's how I'd like to see that scheme rolled out.
What's your view, David Laneham?
To some extent, I agree with Jackie. Welfare should be for the poor, not for everybody. And this idea that because you've had a child, therefore the taxpayers should financially reward you, I think we've got to stop that. It really has to be reserved for those who really do need it. I'm not entirely convinced that paid parental leave for anybody is justified. The argument in terms of the social benefit is the argument goes, well, they won't have children because they can't afford it. That there's an awful lot of societies around the world that don't have PPL.
So you'll support the government removing the double dipping?
Yes, I will. I actually encourage employers to offer paid parental leave to their staff. I think that's an excellent idea, although the public service has really dined out on that pretty badly. So I'm very happy when that's a private arrangement between the employer and the employee. But for ordinary taxpayers to be handing out money to people purely because they've had children with no means testing and so forth, I don't think we can justify that.
Scott Ludlam?
No, I guess I've got quite a different view, and you know, the old saying that it takes a village to raise a child. We do have an agreement, and as part of the social compact in this country, that we do support new parents to a limited degree. And the paid parental leave scheme that we legislated was always intended as a floor or a base. It was certainly not intended as a cap. And ironically, the Liberals were arguing the same way. This whole double dipping thing has come out of some communication strategist. I think it is extremely poorly timed and in really bad taste. It just accuses women of rorting a system that I think is actually completely out of line.
OK, what about superannuation? The Labor Party, Jackie Lambie, have made it clear that they've got their new policy, the 15% tax, if you like, on earnings above $75,000 in super accounts. The government have said that they won't touch it. Some commentators speculate that Tony Abbott will have to change his view on that because of the sheer lost income by not engaging in this. But so far, the government says no. What do you say?
You know, I have the lobbyist groups coming at me like you have no idea. I have community members all over the place. My emails, that seems to be the biggest issue of the week on my emails. I get about 400 a day. So I'm going to reserve how I'm thinking and what I'm going to do and just find out more information on this, because this is really critical to Australia's future, and I want to make sure that if I'm going to come out with an idea or vote for something, then I'm getting it bloody right, I'll be honest.
Scott Ludlam?
It comes back for me to where we were at the beginning of the conversation about a broader retirement incomes review. It's a huge loss to the taxpayer, effectively people using their super funds as tax shelters. It accrues in large measure to people who are doing very, very well, and it shouldn't be that much of a sacred cow. It really, we do need to look at it.
David Laneham?
It's a tax increase, and I don't support tax increases. We're already taxed to the wazoo, as they say.
How does that, David, how does that square with your comment directly before about not supporting people through the tax system who don't need it or don't deserve it?
Tax deductions or a lower tax is not a subsidy. It's just basically taking less of their money against their will. That's what it amounts to. People who've put their money into superannuation under the existing tax system have done so on the assumption that the system will apply to them. Go and change the system after they've saved their money and put their money into that superannuation fund is unjust. Now, if we're going to change the taxing of superannuation, at least it should be prospective, not retrospective. I tend to agree with Scott's view, though, that there needs to be a good look at retirement policy overall. You can take your superannuation out of your super fund in the form of a pension or something like that at zero tax when you turn 60, and yet you're not eligible for the age pension until you're 65. I think it's going up to 67. That's an issue that does need to be addressed.
We're almost out of time. We've only got a few minutes left on the program, but I wanted to get all of your reactions to the sort of frustrations expressed by the government when dealing with the crossbenchers. They tend to claim that it disrupts their mandate. They argue that it's hard to bring you together. They suggest that compromise is difficult to achieve on a lot of issues. I mean, how do each of you react to that? Scott Ludlam?
It's the Senate doing its job. We're elected to provide that diversity. If you look back to 2005, when John Howard had control of both houses of Parliament, it undid them. We had work choices, a radioactive waste dump, abolished compulsory student unions, the terror laws and the welfare to work laws in a single sitting fortnight. I can remember it absolutely clear as day. It was a disaster for the country, and it ended up being really the end of the government, you could argue. The Senate is there to provide that House a review. And
so would you argue that you saved Tony Abbott from himself, perhaps, after that first budget?
I couldn't care less as to whether we saved Tony Abbott. I think we saved, a lot of young people from incredibly punitive welfare changes. We saved Medicare, we saved tertiary education. We're not there to look after the welfare of the government. I think on the whole, the country's a lot better off for blunting the impacts of that budget last
Jackie
year.
Levy, what's your reaction when the government makes those criticisms or attacks?
Well, I think after last year's budget and then this year's, that's probably, like Scott said, has saved a lot of heartache out there in Australian society. That's the first thing. But this crossbench equals chaos is absolute rubbish. What crossbench equals is consultation. And you know what? If their policies are any good, then get out there and sell them and we will buy them. We will vote for them. But if they're no good and they're not going to help Australian society, then I'm not voting for it. It's as simple as that. And I think that's a good thing. What you've got is actually people in the middle there that are saying, hey, you know what, your idea's no good, or yep, it's a great idea, this will help for the future, and that's what we're there for, and I think that's a great thing forward.
Have you seen any improvement this year in your relationship with the government? Obviously, it's just over 100 days since the Prime Minister's spill motion was defeated. The government was at rock bottom. It's recovered somewhat in the polls. Are you seeing any difference in the relationship?
Oh, absolutely. They've dropped their ego. I'll tell you that much. They've dropped their ego a lot. They're actually starting to consult properly, and they're opening their doors now. Whether they're listening, obviously they have been listening. They've been watching what's going on. That's why their budget this time is a lot softer than last year's. So that's definitely the tide's turning there. There's no doubt about that. But in their defence, I've got to say, they're not used to being in this situation. Labor or the Libs are not used to being in this situation where they have this many crossbenchers. So I'm going to give them some adjust and overcome. So they've done that, and I think they're now starting to swing that back around.
Do you agree with that, David Lynham? Have you noticed a change?
Yes, although it's minister by minister, we still have a spectrum from the really consultative ones who know how the game is played and talk to us. The best example would be Scott Morrison. He really has gone from telling to listening during his tenure at immigration, and now he's in social welfare.
Who's the worst example?
I'm not naming anybody. But
you just named the good one. You've got to name the bad.
At the other end of the spectrum is a letter you get saying, I really would like you to support. Here's the name of my advisor and his or her name and email number. Please contact us if you have any queries.
Wow, do they send you letters?
Yeah.
Wow.
Do you get text messages from
Special treatment?
Well, not as an initial contact, but occasionally I do. But that's perfectly acceptable. I tend to agree with Scott, though, that the Senate is doing its job. Scott and I would disagree on the areas in which it's done its job, but the process, I think, is perfectly legitimate. If you're not going to have a Senate doing its job, acting as a House review, then why have it in the first place? If you look at the House can jam through legislation in the space of half an hour because they've got the numbers. Everybody is so obedient. They all follow their whips. Nobody crosses the floor. It's really not a serious review process. The review all happens before it comes into the House. Once it gets to the Senate, though, and they don't have the numbers, and the governments of either side's not had the numbers for very many years since the Senate has existed, as a matter of fact, then the legislation really does get scrutinised in the Parliament. That's what it's there for. And the fact that there's 8 of us ferals plus a few feral greens as well.
Speak for yourself.
All that does is mean the process is a little bit a little bit more
interesting,
yes, than the government would like.
Well, we're going to have to leave it there because we are right out of time. In fact, we're over time. But I appreciate all of your efforts in coming here and joining us live in the studio in particular. Thanks very much for your company. Thank you.
Thank you.
And Troy Bramston, appreciate you joining me as well. Troy and I will be back at the same time next weekend. I'll see you then.
This is the future of mobility. This is reimagining the realms of possibility. This is the BMW i8. And it is these ideas that drive innovation in the BMW 5 Series. With BMW connected drive features such as remote services and surround view, you can experience the ideas of tomorrow today.
At Hotels Combined, we're always hard at work searching for hotel deals. By comparing the top travel sites, we'll find just what you're after.
And it's free.
That's right, our service is free.
And
we also guarantee to get you the best price.
Best price guarantee.
Finding a great hotel deal is easy with Hotels Combined.
Too easy.
Check out Hotels Combined
today.
At Smith's, we're for all fans, like the die-hard, devoted, passionate, borderline obsessive. You have the same haircut as your favourite player, and so does your son and your dog. Smith's, you know you love them.
Enjoy a little extra luxury at Hyundai today, with $2,000 worth of extra features on the new i30 Active X. So spoil yourself at Hyundai before the financial year ends.
Irish voters have said yes to amending the constitution and give same-sex couples the right to marry. All bar one of Ireland's 43 constituencies voted in favour of that change. The yes vote was 62%. Ireland becomes the world's first country to make the change after a popular vote. A big step for the predominantly Catholic country where homosexuality was only decriminalised 22 years ago. An American-led coalition has carried out 22 airstrikes on Islamic State targets in Iraq, as well as 5 strikes in Syria. Meanwhile, Iraqi forces have managed to reclaim some territory from the militant group east of Ramadi. The city and its surrounding province fell to Islamic State a week ago, but government troops have gained some ground in the first counterattack since then. The takeover of Ramadi was Baghdad's worst defeat in almost a year. And learning how to spot a potential jihadi could become a regular part of school life. Under new government plans, the lessons could be added to school curriculums to address the domestic threat of Islamic State and other terror groups. State education ministers will be asked to sign off